back, my friends, to the show that never ends. I'm Brandon Ware. You're watching Angel 65, my channel for all things music related, including music posts and music reviews. And today, this is episode 1 of The Beatles Deep Dive. In this first video, I am going to cover how I will be going about the releases, since the Beatles catalog is a lot more complicated than King Crimson's. They don't have any career-spanning deluxe box sets the way King Crimson does that organizes everything chronologically. So I'm going to go about this a little bit different, but I'm going to try to take in pretty much everything that there is to take in through this process. After I go through my table of contents, then I will begin looking at the first set of reviews that I've already listened to in this first chapter. So, how will I be going about listening to the Beatles catalog? I've decided to break this up into 3 distinct phases, each with some chapters within it, covering a specific group of releases based on the content that they have. So phase 1 is just going to be the remasters, and these are the remasters that were released in 2009. So the original catalog, the original mixes, all remastered in stereo and in mono. The first chapter, including the 3 releases that we'll talk about in this video, is Introductory Compilations. So in this video, after the table of contents, we'll discuss the original 1 compilation, as well as the red and blue albums, which were remastered on CD in 2010 using the same audio that came from the 2009 masters. The second chapter is the UK albums, so covering both the mono CD box set and the stereo CD box set, which were both released in 2009. Then we'll look at the US albums, so I will go through the Capitol albums Volume 1 and Volume 2 box sets. I will not be including the US albums box set, which I don't own. Reason being, that box set, to the best of my knowledge, uses the same exact audio, the 2009 masters, just with different packaging and track listing to match the original American albums. Whereas these 2 box sets, the Capitol albums Volume 1 and 2, actually do use the mono and stereo Capitol masters, which were slightly different than the UK albums, and in some cases even had some things that were unique to just the American discs. Chapter 4 is the singles, which I'm just going to go through the singles collection, which is a 7-inch box set. It has 23 7-inches in it, all 22 of the original UK singles, each in a different sleeve, plus a bonus double-sided single of Real Love and Free as a Bird from the anthology period. That's going to cover all of the remastered audio from the original albums. Phase 2 is films, archival compilations, and documentaries. So in the first chapter, the films and promos, I will start with 1+, which is a 2 Blu-ray and CD compilation. The CD contains new stereo mixes of everything that was on the original 1 compilation, and the 2 Blu-rays contain most of the promo films from throughout their career, including everything on 1, as well as a couple other things that were not on that original 1 compilation. And then we'll go through the 5 original feature films, or 4 of them anyway. We'll do A Hard Day's Night, which I have on DVD, the Help Collector's Edition box set, the Magical Mystery Tour box set, which has a Blu-ray, a DVD, and the original Magical Mystery Tour UK EP on 2 7-inches, which is really cool. The Yellow Submarine Blu-ray, and I don't own a copy of Let It Be, so substituting for Let It Be will be the 2021 Get Back documentary, which I own on Blu-ray. Chapter 6 is BBC recordings, and this will actually be the only part of the chronology that I have not heard anything from. So I will be covering Live at the BBC, as well as On Air Live at the BBC Volume 2, which I just recently purchased as a set that contains both albums. Everything else in this list I will have heard at some point, even if only once or twice, but Live at the BBC Volumes 1 and 2, that is the one official release from the Beatles that I have never previously owned, so that will be brand new audio to me when I get there. Chapter 7 will cover anthology, so the 3 double disc CDs that were released in the 90s, all containing archival material, alternate takes, radio broadcasts, etc., as well as the DVD box set, which contains all 8 episodes of the anthology series, as well as a bonus DVD, and then the anthology book, which I own a paperback copy of, which I have not actually gone through that book in several years, so it'll be nice to go through some of that again, even though a lot of the quotes and information is repeated from the documentary, but it's still nice to have in book form. And then the third and final phase will be the remixes and super deluxe box sets, which I imagine is going to be the most popular part of this series, since those are the most recent things to come out in this chronology. So Chapter 8 will do the Revolver Super Deluxe Edition. Chapter 9 will be the Sgt. Pepper Super Deluxe Edition. Chapter 10 will be the White Album Super Deluxe Edition. And going in order of recording, not release, Chapter 11 will be the Let It Be Super Deluxe Edition, and I'm also going to include the Get Back book and Let It Be Naked CD in that chapter as well, since they all relate to that period. Chapter 12 will be the Abbey Road Super Deluxe Edition. And then Chapter 13, just to tie up loose ends, will be additional remix compilations. So there will be the Yellow Submarine song track, the Love Cirque du Soleil soundtrack with a CD and 5.1 DVD. And then the most recent reissues in this entire chronology are the Red and Blue albums remixed, with each including an expanded disc. So I'm going to save those best for last so that we can come full circle all the way back to the compilations that started this release. So that is all of the releases we'll be covering in this extended series. Now you may be asking, why do a Beatles deep dive when pretty much everyone talks about the Beatles, and there's probably hundreds of other videos on YouTube covering any of these given releases, probably the most recent ones especially. And the reason is I want to answer two questions, one of which is are the Beatles overrated? Because that's a question that I see pop up online a lot. And question two is just, what are the most significant parts of their career, and which of these releases is the most essential? Which ones would I recommend, and which ones have the most value for money? In terms of that first question, obviously I already think the answer is no. I think the Beatles are one of the most important bands, if not the most important band in the pop rock world for everything that they did. But after not going through their extended catalog for a long time, it'll be nice to remind myself of the reasons why, and just explore everything that there is to explore, because especially in recent years with those super deluxe editions, there's been a lot of light shed on their behind the scenes process. There's been a lot of talk about the historicity of their career, as well as some of their most important albums, etc. But it's actually nice to peek behind the curtain a little bit and see exactly what their working process was like and what information you can gain from that in the 21st century, because most people that appreciate music, I think, regard the Beatles highly because of how many boundaries they broke and just how many things that they did that at the time were unprecedented that are now taken for granted. So I'm really looking forward to going through all of these releases again, as many of them I have not listened to in many, many years, especially the original 2009 stereo and mono remixes or remasters. I have not listened to those in years, so I'm really excited to go through both of those sets again. With that out of the way, let's talk about the 3 introductory compilations, starting here with The Beatles 1, which was released in the year 2000, and it's fitting that we start the chronology here because this is where it all started for me. You can probably tell that this CD is fairly aged and is beaten up because I got this when I was 8 or 9 years old, I think, and this is a fascinating place to start. What is 1? So 1 is a collection of all the Beatles singles that reached #1 in either the UK, the US, or both. So we get 27 tracks that all reached #1. Some of these singles are not official British singles. They were exclusive to US releases, such as 8 Days a Week and Yesterday. So the fact that you do get some of those key album cuts that were not singles in the UK does make this a great starting place. However, you have to also keep in mind that there's a lot of important information, a lot of key album cuts that we're missing here. Because, of course, if you've understood their catalog, you know that many of their original UK albums don't contain any of their singles on them, such as the White Album and Sgt. Pepper. So those albums are not represented here at all. You do get Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby from Revolver, but again, that's an extremely important album. I will say right now that's my favorite Beatles album. and it's underrepresented here. So this is a fantastic place to start. The packaging is also quite nice because on the original booklet, each track gets its own page, and there's a really great introductory essay by George Martin, and on each of the individual pages there are some of the single releases from throughout the world, so different covers for the different single releases. So it does provide a good visual history as well, even though some of these are anachronistic, meaning they have pictures on the covers that are not contemporaneous to when the actual single was released. But it's also got some track details, including when the single was released in the UK, in the US, where it went to #1, and how long it stayed at #1, which if you actually go through that timeline, it's fascinating to think just how much the Beatles really did dominate the charts. I mean, especially in the first half of the 60s. They spent so many weeks at #1 that it's truly unbelievable. There's never been anything like it before or since. This, the mastering on this, it is remastered, but it's not the same audio from the 2009 remasters. I believe this was reissued in 2009 with that, with those remasters on them, but this is the original 2000 CD, so this was all remastered from analog in 2000, and I must say, compared to the 2009 masters, which I really, really prefer, this definitely sounds a bit harsh in places. It doesn't sound dated, or like the tapes were damaged or anything, with possibly the exception of the first 3 tracks, which are all in mono, because they were only ever mixed in mono to begin with. But I don't think the mastering on this is as good as what was to come. That said, if you're a brand new Beatles fan and have not heard anything by them, and are looking for a great place to start that covers a lot of their most important tracks, well, this is certainly a great, easy, palatable compilation to start with. However, a much better representation of their entire career would be these 2 albums, which is the Red and Blue album. This is 1962 to 1966. And these releases are the 2010 remaster digipack editions with the same audio from the 2009 remasters, so just taken straight from that box set and packaged into 2 separate compilations. These are not the most recent 2023 issues on CD that have bonus tracks and were all remixed by Giles Martin. These are still the original mixes, with the exception of the first 4 tracks on the first disc of this compilation. Everything is the stereo mixes, which is, depending on how you feel about those stereo mixes of any given period, that could either be seen as a plus or a minus. So every single track that's on one is also included across these 2 compilations, but these are much more complete because they give a lot of album tracks as well, and also some single tracks that didn't make it to #1 that are still incredibly important. So I'll quickly go through this track by track, just with an overview of what periods are covered. So here we start with Love Me Do, Please Please Me, From Me to You, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand. So the first 5 singles. We get All My Loving from With the Beatles, Can't Buy Me Love and A Hard Day's Night from the Hard Day's Night soundtrack, and I Love Her from A Hard Day's Night. We get 8 Days a Week, which is from Beatles for Sale and was a single in the US. And then we get I Feel Fine, Ticket to Ride, and Yesterday. On disc 2, we open with the title track from Help, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. Key album cut, definitely needs to be heard. Then we get the double A-side single, We Can Work It Out, and Day Tripper. And then we get 6 tracks from Rubber Soul, which had no singles on it. So we get a pretty fair sampling of the Rubber Soul album, which is another one of their key albums. So we get Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, Michelle, In My Life, and Girl. And then we close with the Paperback Writer single, just the A-side. And then Eleanor Rigby, Yellow Submarine, which was another double A-side of 2 songs included on Revolver. So, the benefit of this is that you get a lot of the key album cuts. Another benefit is that it's extremely short, to the point where it's almost funny that they did split it into 2 CDs to match the original LP version, which I like. I'm glad it matches the original LP, but each disc is about 30 minutes, so they could have fit all of it onto a single disc and then some, which they chose not to do, which I'm fine with. But this was, I think I paid $14 for this when it was brand new. I'm not sure how much you can find this version now for. I know I believe the only thing that's available currently is the new version with the remixes. To find this original Digipack compilation, I'm not sure what price you can find this for. But the packaging is very nice, and I really love the way these Digipacks were done, both here and in the stereo box set, where it says the Beatles on the side, and then you just get the front cover. You get what was the original back cover on the inside, because the two images from 63 and 69 are, of course, reversed on the two albums, representing the different periods. And the booklet is really, really nice, because you get a very good essay by Bill Flanagan. It includes the same introductory part with an overview of both compilations in both of the releases. And then there's an exclusive part to each release as well that talks about the specific period that's covered. And then in the back half of the booklet, you get all the original lyrics, which were printed on the original sleeves for these compilations as well when they were released in 1973. So the plus is really nice packaging, lots of great photos, lyrics included. The remasters, as I said, sound great. Short, easy, palatable. The drawbacks of this compilation is that I still feel like this period, the first half of the Beatles' career, is underrepresented. There's a lot of really great album tracks on particularly Beatles for Sale that I think were overlooked, such as Babies in Black, I'm a Loser, No Reply. The first 3 tracks on that album are all killer, and they're not included here. The only track from that album included is 8 Days a Week. Furthermore, Paperback Writer. I really believe Rain should have been included as well, because Rain is one of their best and most important B-sides, so that is not included on this compilation. And then you only get the double A-side single, Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine, from Revolver, both hugely important tracks, especially Eleanor Rigby, which is one of my all-time faves. But Revolver is severely underrepresented. They could have included plenty of tracks on that album that really point the way forward. Perhaps they didn't because they wanted to save the more experimental and psychedelic stuff for the second compilation, just to show how much the Beatles did grow in the second half of their career. But it's a shame that this is missing a lot of key tracks on Revolver. It also does not include any of George Harrison's compositions from this period. This is all Lennon and McCartney compositions. So you're missing some of his key early tracks. You Like Me Too Much. What else? If I Needed Someone, which some of that is included on the newer version that has bonus tracks, all remixed, which is great, but the original compilation, it's a good overview of the first half of their period, but it's still missing some key moments on it, which could have easily fit, given that each disc is only 30 minutes. Which is in stark contrast to the second part, the Blue Album, 1967 to 1970, where each of these discs approaches 50 minutes, which in 1973 was pretty long for an LP, so they clearly indulged more in terms of what they included on this. This compilation, it opens with the double A-side single that they first released in 67, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, both hugely important tracks that absolutely need to be included. We get 4 selections from Sgt. Pepper's. We get the title track, With a Little Help from My Friends, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and A Day in the Life, which I believe are probably the 4 best ones to include. Those are the best overview of the period, although of course Sgt. Pepper is a perfect classic album, so they could have included pretty much anything, but I think they picked the right ones. You get All You Need Is Love, which was from the first worldwide TV broadcast. Then you get I Am the Walrus, which is the B-side of All You Need Is Love, and was also included in the Magical Mystery Tour film. Again, hugely important track, so it's absolutely necessary that it's on here, even though it wasn't a number 1, it was just a B-side. And then we get the Hello Goodbye single, we get The Fool on the Hill and Magical Mystery Tour from the Magical Mystery Tour album and film. We get the Lady Madonna single, and then disc 1 closes with Hey Jude and Revolution, another double single that was released in the later half of 1968. Both hugely important tracks. Disc 2 opens with 3 selections from the White Album, so we get Back in the USSR, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Obla Di Obla Da. Again, hard to represent that album fairly, given that it has 30 songs on it. The first 2 I definitely believe should be included. Obla Di Obla Da, I like it, but I'm not sure it was the best inclusion. I might have opted for Blackbird instead, as I think that's a more important track, but still a fair representation of the period. We Get Back and Don't Let Me Down, so the first single from '69. Important to note that these are the single versions that predate the Let It Be album, because the Get Back single version is different than the album version. And then we get another A and B side, The Ballad of John and Yoko. And what I think is the oddest inclusion on here is Old Brown Shoe, the B-side of Ballad of John and Yoko. I don't say that because I dislike it. I love it. It's a great song. It was just not a hit, and it's a pretty obscure track. So the fact that they included that on this and yet left stuff like Rain, an arguably more important B-side, off of this compilation is a bit strange to me, but there we have it. And then the final half of disc 2, we have 4 selections from Abbey Road, Here Comes the Sun, Come Together, Something, and Octopus's Garden. So we represent George and Ringo on Abbey Road, which is great. We get both of George's compositions on Abbey Road, which are arguably the 2 best songs on the entire album, so that's fair. We get the single version of Let It Be, so the original version released in early 1970, not the version with the tons and tons of overdubs that Phil Spector later did on the album. And then we close with 2 tracks from the Let It Be album, Across the Universe and The Long and Winding Road, which are both excellent tracks, but of course they were, what's the best term here, tampered with by Phil Spector, much to the chagrin of Paul McCartney, where lots of overdubs, his classic wall of sound technique was applied. Still great songs, still definitely worth hearing. So if you're a brand new Beatles fan, I think this is probably the fairest compilation to start with, just because it gives you an overview of the tracks that they're best known for, the tracks that were hits. If you want a more complete and comprehensive overview of their entire career, then I would argue that you definitely need both of these, unless you just want to jump right into the albums after hearing one. But if you want still a taste of a lot of the key album tracks that are not included on this one, then these are both highly necessary. And as I said, I really like the 2009 remasters. I think both of these sound fantastic. I just listened to them for the first time in years today and was blown away with how good they sound. Much better than the mastering on this original one CD, I believe. I know some people have some gripes with the 2009 masters, and that's fine. Those are the masters that introduced me to the Beatles. Those are the ones that I grew up listening to. That's my generation's of Beatles masters. I've not heard anything before that, save for some vinyl of the US albums, which were repressed on Capitol. I got those from my grandparents, and I kept them for a while when I first started collecting records as a very young child. To be honest, they were not the best sounding, the way the Capitol altered some of them. I didn't care for the track lists compared to the UK albums, and some of them were in very poor condition, not taken care of particularly well over the 40 years that they just sat in a shelf unused. I did end up selling those and made quite a bit of money off of them to buy my Les Paul, which I named Steve. So, and hope that is not an insult to my grandparents. They didn't think it was. Steve gets used every single day. That's the Les Paul I practice on at least 15 minutes every day. So a worthwhile trade in my opinion. And we'll still get to hear some of that US audio later in this chronology anyway. But anyway, my point I was making is, except for those LPs, I have not heard any earlier masters of the Beatles albums except these. These are what introduced me to them. By the time I picked up these compilations, I had probably had 5 of the Digipack remasters in stereo. I believe by this point I had already heard the White Album, Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road, Let It Be, and maybe the Past Masters compilation. I believe those were the 5 that I had already heard before I went through the entire chronology and heard everything. So this did still introduce me to some stuff that I had not heard yet or was not as familiar with. What do I give the compilations? Well, for the track listing, this one gets 4 out of 5 because they could have included more. Even in 1973, they could have included more. They could have packed that record fuller than it was. This one, 5 out of 5, though, because I think this is a phenomenal overview of the later half of their career, and the fact that you do get 4 George Harrison songs and a Ringo song on here means that it's a fairer representation of everything that they did in their very short but prolific time together. This compilation, well, for what it is it serves its purpose well, which is include all of the big hits on one CD. So for that reason, it gets 5 out of 5. However, as I said, if you're a new Beatles fan, this gives you a fair overview of their probably most famous tracks, many of them anyway. It doesn't give you a necessarily fair overview of everything that they did, because a lot of their key tracks that were the most influential were not singles. So those are my thoughts on the introductory compilations. I'm going to move now into the actual original UK albums, starting with the mono set, because I have not heard the mono mixes of the first 6 albums in quite some time, probably since I first bought that set. About 4 years ago I bought that set, so it's going to be nice to go through those again and then go through the stereo versions as well. I hope that you got some insight out of this video, and I hope that you're going to join me on this journey, and hopefully I can provide some kind of insight to the Beatles, or say something that hasn't already been said 10 million times before. Maybe I can speak to people my own age that are not as familiar with their catalog, because I will say right now, even before I go into this, if there's one band in pop rock history that deserves to have every single of their original albums explored, it's the Beatles. Of course it is, because what they did in their 7.5 years together is absolutely unmatched to this day. And the boundaries they broke and the people they influenced, we're still feeling that influence today. Modern pop artists are ripping off the Beatles left and right, even if the people listening to them that are my age don't know that. So these are definitely a great starting point. I would recommend them for sure. That is all for now. I will see you maybe again before Thanksgiving if I get through both of those original UK album box sets. Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.